Okay. Today we're going to talk about how, as journalists, we can delve deeper into the underlying issues of the stories that we're trying to tell. So what is our goal for today? Today I want to teach you that while writers do notice stories every day, the best writers do more than that. They investigate issues that matter in their community, and they find the stories that reveal those issues. Then they craft new stories to illuminate those underlying issues. So how do we go about doing that? First, we want to make sure that we have a reason for writing. For example, maybe it's a social issue or a social injustice that we really care about as writers. And our goal might be to teach other people about this issue and make it more visible. As a journalist, you're going to need to do research, oftentimes to gather more information on that issue as you write your story. You're going to want to collect significant stories to highlight the issue. And you're going to want to think to yourself, would the community really care about this issue? And then say more about that issue. So today we are especially going to focus on more of these bullet points here, where we're collecting the stories that we have that highlight issues and thinking about whether the community cares about the issue that is being highlighted or not. We have an anchor chart here that we'll take a look at, and it gives us some tips for doing this. It says journalists seek and tell stories to get their readers to care about an issue by, number one, naming the issue clearly as a starting point. Number two, thinking about if the issue has parts that might lead to more stories. Number three, being flexible and responsive. As you collect and reflect, be willing to rethink the issue itself. And number four, using every skill you've got as a storyteller to stir your reader up. Look at mentors and checklists and call these skills to mind. Get your readers to think and make them care about your issue. So specifically, sometimes we have a story, and as we think about that story a little more deeply, we might realize that while it has an issue that is meaningful, it may not be meaningful to the greater community, to a large number of people. It might be a little too specific of a message, and maybe it only matters to ourselves as the author or to the subjects of our stories. For example, I have a story it's about my dog Shiloh. So in this story, Shiloh and Alex were playing out back in the common lot behind the house, and Shiloh heard an animal and took off after the animal. Alex went searching for the dog, couldn't find him. Eventually got his family involved in looking for the dog, and it took a long time, but eventually Shiloh did come back. When Shiloh finally returned, he was very overheated from the heat, which was concerning because some heat exhaustion was beginning to set in, and he had his eye scratched up from getting attacked from an animal. Now, as an author, if I'm thinking about this story, about the message here, we have the message of that Alex learned that he better not play with Shiloh in the common lot in the future because he could get out like this and he could get hurt. Now, if I think about that message in terms of who does it matter to, does it matter to just a small group of people or to the greater community? And I think I can see that it's really only meaningful to Alex and perhaps his family. And that's a small group of people, so that's not going to make as good of a source of a story for an investigative journalistic article as one that would matter to the whole community. So, as I said, the goal is to write a story with a message that is meaningful to the larger community, which means a large number of people. So we can think about stories that we already have that may have that very specific message that only matters to a small number of people. And in some cases, we might be able to tweak that message and turn it into a message that is more meaningful to a larger community. In this case, maybe this story could really be more focused on the importance of leash laws and how The goal of these kinds of laws is to not only protect the animals themselves, but to protect the community from harm, because the dog could have harmed another person, another animal, or even property, as well as gotten harmed himself. Now, this kind of a focus would be meaningful to the larger community. So this would be a better message to integrate into the story for a news article. How can we go about planning? For today, I'm just going to ask that you start thinking about the stories that you already know, or stories that you already know you want to write, and just list those stories out. And then think about what audience might find the message within those stories meaningful. You can see in this case, I have a story of Shiloh, which, is, as I've already mentioned, is meaningful to Alex. I have another story about one of my race DNFs last year when I failed to complete a race. That might only be meaningful to me. Then we can think to ourselves, is it possible to tweak these messages and make them meaningful to a larger audience? As I already said, the story of Shiloh could be tweaked and turn into a message about leash laws. The story of the race DNF, however, cannot be tweaked. It is always going to only be meaningful to me because it's a personal story. So when this is the case and we cannot tweak it to make it meaningful to a larger number of people, then we're just going to eliminate that story from our list because it's not going to make a good news article. Now it's your turn to try this out. I want you to jot down some story ideas you have or story ideas that you've already worked with. I want you to list out the messages for each story. Write down to whom the message will be meaningful for each of those stories. If that message is only meaningful to a small group, you need to think about whether you can tweak that message and make it meaningful to a larger group or not. If you cannot make it meaningful to a larger group by tweaking the message, then cross that story off as an option. The stories that you're left with are stories that would make good news articles for yourself, and then you can begin working with those in our next session.